My name is Marcus Thompson, and 3 years ago, I thought I was living the American dream, fresh out of Stanford with a computer science degree, working at what seemed like the hottest tech startup in Silicon Valley. The salary was incredible. The office had those fancy espresso machines, and everyone kept talking about how we were going to change the world. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. But dreams can turn into nightmares faster than you can say stock options. The company was called Neuralink Solutions, not the famous one you're thinking of, just another startup with big ambitions and an even bigger ego at the helm. Our CTO, Bradley Richardson, had this way of making you feel like you were part of something revolutionary. He'd walk around in his designer hoodies, talking about disrupting entire industries and making everyone rich in the process. I believed every word. What I didn't know was that Bradley had been planning something from the very beginning, something that would cost me everything I'd worked for, steal the code I'd poured my heart into, and leave me questioning whether I'd ever trust anyone in Silicon Valley again. But here's the thing about underestimating people. Sometimes the person you think you've destroyed is the one holding all the cards. The interview process at Neuralink Solutions was unlike anything I'd experienced. Most tech companies put you through the usual gauntlet of coding challenges and behavioral questions, but Bradley Richardson had a different approach. He wanted to see how you thought, how you solved problems that didn't have obvious answers. "Marcus," he said during our final interview, leaning back in his expensive leather chair, "I don't care about your GPA or what programming languages you know. I care about vision. Do you have the vision to see beyond what exists today?" The office was everything you'd expect from a well-funded startup. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown San Francisco, ping-pong tables that nobody ever seemed to use, and workstations equipped with the latest hardware. But what caught my attention wasn't the amenities, it was the energy. Everyone seemed genuinely excited about what they were building. Bradley explained the company's mission during that interview. Neuralink Solutions was developing artificial intelligence systems that could predict human behavior patterns with unprecedented accuracy. Not just simple consumer preferences, but complex decision-making processes that could revolutionize everything from healthcare to financial services. We're talking about AI that can predict when someone is about to make a major life decision, Bradley said, his eyes lighting up with the kind of enthusiasm that's either genuine brilliance or dangerous delusion. Imagine being able to intervene before someone makes a choice they'll regret. Imagine the applications in mental health, in education, in criminal justice. The technical challenges were immense. We were working with neural networks that had to process massive amounts of behavioral data while maintaining privacy standards that would satisfy the most stringent regulation. The algorithms needed to be sophisticated enough to recognize subtle patterns in human behavior, yet simple enough to run efficiently on standard hardware. My background in machine learning made me a perfect fit for the core development team. Bradley offered me a position as senior software engineer with a starting salary that was 30% higher than what I'd been expecting. The equity package was generous, and he promised rapid advancement opportunities for anyone who could prove their worth. I accepted on the spot. My first day at Neuralink Solutions felt like walking into the future. The development team was small but incredibly talented. There was Jennifer Walsh, a former Google engineer who specialized in data architecture, David Kim, who'd worked on predictive modeling systems for Netflix, and Sarah Mitchell, whose expertise in neural network optimization had caught the attention of several major tech companies. Bradley made it clear from the beginning that he expected exceptional work, not just competent code, but innovative solutions that would give Neuralink Solutions a competitive advantage that other companies couldn't replicate. "We're not here to build another generic AI platform," he announced during our first team meeting. "We're here to create something that will define the next decade of artificial intelligence development. Each of you was chosen because you have the potential to contribute something unique to this vision." The project structure was unlike anything I'd encountered in previous internships or academic settings. Instead of being assigned to specific features or modules, each engineer was given broad autonomy to explore different aspects of the system. Bradley encouraged us to think like entrepreneurs, not just employees. My initial assignment was to develop the core behavioral prediction algorithm. These were the mathematical models that would analyze user data and generate predictions about future action. The complexity was staggering. We were dealing with millions of variables, real-time data streams, and prediction accuracies that needed to exceed 90% to be commercially viable. But I thrived in that environment. The combination of technical challenge and creative freedom was exactly what I'd been hoping for in my first job out of college. I'd arrive at the office early, stay late, and spend weekends refining algorithms that I genuinely believed could change the world. Bradley took notice of my dedication almost immediately. Within my first month, he started inviting me to strategic planning meetings that were typically reserved for senior staff. He'd ask for my input on technical decisions, and seemed genuinely interested in my ideas about the product's future direction. "Marcus," he said after one particularly productive brainstorming session, "you have something special. Most engineers can implement solutions, but you can envision possibilities that others can't see. That's rare." The praise felt incredible. Here was someone who'd founded multiple successful companies, who'd raised millions in venture capital, who'd been featured in TechCrunch and Forbes, and he was telling me that I had unique potential. It was exactly the kind of validation that every ambitious young engineer dreams of receiving. As weeks turned into months, my responsibilities expanded significantly. Bradley began assigning me to work on the most critical components of the system, the algorithms that would differentiate Neuralink solutions from every other AI company trying to solve similar problems. The breakthrough came during my 4th month at the company. I'd been working on a particularly challenging aspect of the behavioral prediction system, trying to develop algorithms that could accurately forecast complex decision-making patterns without requiring invasive data collection methods. Traditional approaches to behavioral prediction relied on gathering massive amounts of personal information, browsing histories, location data, purchase records, social media activity. But this created privacy concerns that made many potential clients uncomfortable, and it also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by competitors or malicious actors. I proposed a different approach. Instead of collecting more data, we could develop algorithms that would identify subtle patterns in minimal datasets. The key was understanding that human behavior, while complex, follows predictable mathematical patterns when analyzed at sufficient scale. The concept was based on chaos theory principles applied to behavioral analysis. Just as meteorologists can predict weather patterns by analyzing relatively simple atmospheric variables, we could predict human behavior by identifying the underlying mathematical structures that govern decision-making processes. I spent 3 weeks developing the initial prototype, working 16-hour days, and consuming enough coffee to power a small aircraft. The results exceeded every expectation. Our behavioral prediction accuracy jumped from 73% to 96%, while simultaneously reducing the amount of required input data by more than 60%. Bradley was ecstatic when I presented the results during our weekly team meeting. He immediately classified the work as proprietary and restricted access to the core algorithms to only 3 people: himself, me, and the lead architect, Jennifer Walsh. "This is it," he said, reviewing the performance metric. "This is what's going to make Neuralink Solutions the most valuable AI company in the world. Marcus, you've just created something that will revolutionize how we understand human behavior." The validation was intoxicating. Not only had I solved a problem that had been stumping the entire development team, but I'd done it in a way that was both technically elegant and commercially valuable. Bradley started referring to my work as the Thompson algorithm in internal documents, and suddenly I was being invited to client presentations and investor meetings. But success in Silicon Valley comes with its own set of challenges. The more valuable your contributions become, the more people start paying attention to what you're doing, and not everyone has your best interests at heart. The first sign of trouble came during a client demonstration about 6 months into my employment. We were presenting our behavioral prediction system to a Fortune 500 company that was considering implementing our technology for their customer service operations. The presentation went perfectly. Our system accurately predicted customer behavior patterns in real time, demonstrating how the client could proactively address customer needs before problems arose. The potential cost savings were enormous, and the client representatives were clearly impressed. But after the meeting, I noticed something strange. Bradley had introduced my algorithms as proprietary Neuralink Solutions technology without mentioning my specific contributions. When I asked him about it privately, he explained that client presentations required a unified company voice. We can't have clients thinking that our core technology depends on individual contributors, he said. It makes the company seem unstable. But don't worry, your contributions are fully recognized internally, and they'll be reflected in your compensation and advancement opportunity. The explanation made sense at the time. I was still relatively new to the corporate world, and Bradley had years of experience managing client relationships and investor expectations. I trusted his judgment about how to present our technology to external stakeholders. Over the following months, my role at Neuralink Solutions continued to evolve. Bradley assigned me to lead development of several new features, all building on the foundational algorithms I'd created. The technology was becoming more sophisticated, more valuable, and more central to the company's competitive strategy. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I was working on machine learning models that could adapt to individual user patterns, prediction systems that could operate in real time across multiple platforms, and optimization algorithms that could improve performance based on feedback loops. Each innovation built on the previous work, creating an increasingly complex and valuable technological ecosystem. The company was growing rapidly. We hired additional engineers, expanded our sales team, and opened a second office in Austin. Bradley was raising a Series B funding round that would value the company at over $200 million, and he frequently mentioned how the core technology, my algorithms, were the primary driver of investor interest. My compensation reflected the value I was creating. Bradley increased my salary twice in 8 months, granted additional equity options, and promoted me to principal engineer with a direct report structure that put 5 junior developers under my supervision. But there were subtle changes in the company culture that I didn't fully appreciate at the time. New employees were required to sign more restrictive non-compete agreements. Access to certain technical documentation required additional security clearances, and Bradley began scheduling regular one-on-one meetings with key team members to discuss strategic alignment and company loyalty. The conversations were always friendly and professional, but they carried an undercurrent of something that I couldn't quite identify. Bradley would ask about my career goals, my long-term plans, and my thoughts about the company's direction. He'd emphasize how important it was that key contributors remained committed to Neuralink Solutions' success. "Marcus," he said during one of these meetings, "you're not just an employee here, you're a partner in building something extraordinary. But partnerships require trust, and trust requires commitment. I need to know that you're committed to seeing this through, regardless of what opportunities might arise elsewhere." I assured him that I was fully committed to the company's success, and I meant it. Neuralink Solutions was my first real job, my first opportunity to work on technology that could have genuine impact, and my first chance to prove that I belonged in Silicon Valley's elite tech community. What I didn't realize was that Bradley was already planning my exit. The signs were there, but I was too focused on the technical challenges and too trusting of the people around me to recognize them. New team members were being assigned to work on alternative implementations of my algorithm. Client presentations were being restructured to minimize mentions of individual contributors, and certain technical documentation was being moved to systems that I didn't have access to. But I was 24 years old, passionate about the work, and convinced that I was building something that would define my career for decades to come. I had no idea that I was actually building the foundation for my own professional destruction. The algorithm I developed wasn't just valuable, it was revolutionary. It represented a fundamental breakthrough in how artificial intelligence could understand and predict human behavior. In the right hands, it could generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and establish whoever controlled it as a dominant force in the AI industry. Bradley Richardson knew exactly how valuable it was, and he had no intention of sharing that value with the person who'd created it. The Series B funding round was scheduled to close in March, and the entire company was operating in overdrive. Bradley had been flying between San Francisco, New York, and Boston, meeting with venture capital firms and demonstrating our technology to potential investors. The presentations were going exceptionally well, with several firms expressing strong interest in leading the round. I was spending most of my time preparing technical documentation for the due diligence process. Potential investors wanted detailed analysis of our algorithms, performance benchmarks, and competitive advantages. Bradley had assigned me to create comprehensive technical reports that would convince investors that Neuralink solutions possessed genuinely revolutionary technology. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was essentially documenting my own work to help raise money for a company that was becoming increasingly secretive about individual contributions. But I approached the task with the same dedication I'd brought to everything else at Neuralink Solutions. During this period, I noticed that Bradley was having more frequent closed-door meetings with external consultants. When I asked Jennifer Walsh about it, she mentioned that the company was bringing in strategic advisors to help with the scaling process. Large funding rounds apparently required additional expertise in areas like intellectual property management, competitive positioning, and organizational restructuring. It's normal for companies at our stage, Jennifer explained. Bradley wants to make sure we're prepared for the next phase of growth. These consultants have experience helping startups transition from product development to market domination. The explanation seemed reasonable, but something about the timing felt off. Most of these consultations were happening during core development hours, when technical team members were typically collaborating on system improvements and feature implementations. It created an atmosphere of separation between the business operations and the engineering work. Meanwhile, my algorithms were performing better than ever. The behavioral prediction accuracy had reached 98% in controlled testing environments, and we were successfully processing real-time data streams from multiple client implementations. The technology was proving itself in commercial applications, generating measurable value for customers and establishing Neuralink Solutions as a serious player in the AI industry. Bradley seemed particularly excited about a potential partnership with a major healthcare company. They were interested in using our behavioral prediction technology to identify patients who might be at risk for medication non-compliance or treatment abandonment. The application could save lives while reducing healthcare costs, and the contract value was substantial enough to single-handedly justify our Series B valuation. "This is exactly what we've been working toward," Bradley said during one of our strategy meetings. "We're not just building another tech product, we're creating solutions that will have genuine impact on people's lives." The healthcare partnership proves that our technology can scale across industries and generate sustainable revenue streams. I was invited to participate in several technical discussions with the healthcare company's IT team. Their questions were sophisticated and challenging, focusing on data privacy, algorithmic transparency, and integration complexity. But our technology handled every requirement they presented, often exceeding their expectations for performance and flexibility. The partnership negotiations were progressing smoothly when I received an unexpected email from Bradley. He wanted to schedule a private meeting to discuss career development opportunities and strategic planning for the next phase of company growth. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in his office. When I arrived, Bradley was reviewing financial projections on his computer, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and investor presentations. He seemed focused and energetic, clearly pleased with how the funding round was progressing. "Marcus," he began, "I've been thinking about your future here at Neuralink Solutions. You've made incredible contributions to our technology platform, and I want to make sure you're positioned to maximize your impact as we scale." He explained that the company was restructuring its technical organization to support rapid growth. The engineering team would be divided into specialized units, each focusing on specific aspects of the overall system. This would allow for more efficient development processes and clearer accountability structures. "I'm creating a new position that would be perfect for your skills and interests," Bradley continued. "Director of Advanced Research, reporting directly to me, with responsibility for exploring next-generation applications of our core technology. It comes with a significant salary increase and additional equity options." The offer sounded attractive, but something about the timing concerned me. We were in the middle of critical development cycles for existing client implementations. Creating a new research-focused position would remove me from the day-to-day technical work that I'd been leading for the past year. What would happen to the current projects I'm managing? Bradley waved dismissively. Those projects are mature enough to transition to other team members. Jennifer Walsh and David Kim are fully capable of handling the implementation detail. Your talents are better utilized exploring breakthrough applications that will define our next phase of innovation. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Bradley outlining the responsibilities and opportunities associated with the new position. He was persuasive and enthusiastic, painting a picture of cutting-edge research projects and industry leadership opportunities, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was changing in my relationship with the company. The new role would give me less direct control over the algorithms I'd developed, less involvement in client implementations, and less visibility into the commercial applications of my work. Can I think about it over the weekend? I asked. Bradley's expression shifted slightly, showing a flash of something that might have been irritation or disappointment, but he quickly recovered his professional demeanor. Of course, this is an important decision, and I want you to feel completely comfortable with the direction we're heading. Take all the time you need. That weekend, I found myself questioning everything about my position at Neuralink Solutions. The new role offer, the timing of the reorganization, the increasing secrecy around business operations. It all felt coordinated in a way that wasn't entirely transparent. I decided to do some research. Using my access to the company's internal systems, I began reviewing recent changes to our technical documentation, code repositories, and client presentation materials. What I discovered was deeply troubling. Over the past 3 months, there had been systematic modifications to how my algorithms were documented and attributed. References to my specific contributions were being replaced with generic descriptions of Neuralink Solutions' proprietary technology. Code comments that included my name were being edited to remove personal identifiers, and new documentation was being created that positioned the algorithms as collaborative team achievements rather than individual innovation. More concerning was the discovery that backup copies of my original code were being moved to restricted access servers. The repositories that contained my initial algorithm implementations were being migrated to systems that required special authorization to access. I spent the entire weekend analyzing these changes, trying to understand the pattern and implications. By Sunday evening, I had reached an uncomfortable conclusion. Someone was systematically removing evidence of my individual contributions to the company's core technology. Monday morning, I arrived at the office early and requested a meeting with Bradley. I wanted to discuss my concerns about the documentation changes and understand the reasoning behind the systematic modifications to technical attribution. He explained that the changes were part of a broader effort to standardize technical documentation and improve security protocols. Individual attribution in technical documents created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by competitors or malicious actors. We're protecting the company's intellectual property, he said. In a competitive industry like AI, you can't afford to have detailed documentation that reveals exactly how your technology works or who developed specific components. It's a matter of corporate security. The explanation had some logic to it, but it didn't address why the changes were being made without consulting the affected team members. If security was the concern, why wasn't the engineering team involved in developing the new documentation standard? I understand the security concerns, I said, but I think the team should be involved in deciding how to balance transparency with protection. These algorithms represent months of work, and the people who created them should have input into how they're documented and attributed. Bradley's demeanor shifted noticeably. The friendly, collaborative tone that had characterized our previous interactions was replaced by something more formal and distant. Marcus, I appreciate your concern, but these decisions are being made at the executive level based on advice from legal counsel and security consultants. The engineering team's job is to develop technology, not to manage intellectual property strategy. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, but it was clear that Bradley had no intention of reversing the documentation changes or involving the engineering team in future decisions about technical attribution. He seemed genuinely surprised that I was concerned about individual recognition for my work. "You're part of a team," he said finally. "Team success is what matters, not individual credit. When Neuralink Solutions succeeds, everyone benefits through equity appreciation and career advancement. That's how startups work." I left the meeting feeling unsettled and uncertain about my future at the company. The director of advanced research position was still on the table, but accepting it would mean moving away from the hands-on technical work that I loved and trusted other people to maintain and develop the algorithms I'd create. Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention to the subtle changes happening around me. New team members were being assigned to work on enhanced versions of my algorithms. Client presentations were being restructured to minimize mentions of specific technical contributors, and certain aspects of our technology were being discussed in meetings that I was no longer invited to attend. The healthcare partnership negotiations reached a critical phase during this period. The client was ready to move forward with a pilot implementation, but they had specific requirements about algorithmic transparency and technical documentation that needed to be addressed before finalizing the contract. I was asked to prepare detailed technical specifications for the pilot program, including performance benchmarks, integration requirements, and security protocols. The work required deep knowledge of the algorithm implementations and their operational characteristics. But when I began preparing the documentation, I discovered that my access to certain code repositories had been restricted. The systems that contained the most recent versions of my algorithms were now classified as executive access only, requiring special authorization that I apparently didn't have. When I asked Jennifer Walsh about the access restrictions, she seemed surprised and uncomfortable. She explained that recent security upgrades had resulted in temporary limitations on certain system access, but she didn't have detailed information about the timeline for resolving the issues. "You should talk to Bradley about it," she suggested. "He's been managing all the security protocol changes." I scheduled another meeting with Bradley to discuss the access restrictions and their impact on my ability to complete the healthcare partnership documentation. His response was immediate and concerned. "The access restrictions are temporary," he said, "but they're necessary to protect our intellectual property during the funding round. Too many people having access to core algorithms creates security vulnerabilities that could jeopardize our competitive position." "But I developed those algorithms," I said. "I need access to the code to create accurate technical documentation for the healthcare partnership." Bradley's expression became distinctly cold. "Marcus, you developed those algorithms as an employee of Neuralink Solutions. The company owns all intellectual property created by its employees. Your access to that IP is determined by your current role and responsibilities, not by your historical contributions." The conversation was a turning point in my understanding of the situation. Bradley wasn't just managing security protocols or reorganizing technical documentation. He was systematically removing my access to the work I'd created while maintaining the fiction that I was still a valued team member. "What exactly are you saying?" Bradley leaned back in his chair, adopting the patronizing tone that successful executives often use when explaining harsh realities to naive employees. "I'm saying that you have two choices. You can accept the Director of Advanced Research position and focus on future innovations, or you can continue in your current role with the understanding that your responsibilities may be limited by security requirements and organizational changes. And if I don't accept either option, then you'll need to consider whether Neuralink Solutions is the right place for your career development." The threat was clear and unmistakable. "Accept a diminished role with no access to my own work, or face the possibility of being pushed out of the company entirely." I asked for another weekend to consider my options, but I already knew what I had to do. Bradley Richardson was systematically stealing my work, and he was giving me the choice between complicity and termination. What he didn't know was that I had been preparing for this possibility since the first time I noticed the documentation changes, and I had taken steps to protect myself that would soon turn his carefully orchestrated theft into the biggest mistake of his career. That Sunday evening, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of accepting Bradley's ultimatum or walking away quietly, I decided to fight back. But first I needed to understand exactly what I was up against and what resources I had available. I spent the night going through every document I'd saved, every email I'd archived, and every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past 18 months at Neuralink Solutions. What I discovered was more extensive than I'd initially realized. Bradley's plan hadn't started recently. It had been in motion almost from the beginning of my employment. The systematic documentation changes, the restricted access protocols, the strategic repositioning of my role, all of it was part of a carefully orchestrated campaign to separate me from my intellectual property while maintaining plausible deniability. But Bradley had made several crucial mistakes in his execution. The most significant was his assumption that I was just another naive young engineer who would accept whatever narrative he presented. He had underestimated both my technical sophistication and my attention to detail. Starting in my third month at Neuralink Solutions, I had begun maintaining personal backups of all my work. This wasn't driven by paranoia. It was a standard practice I'd learned during my computer science program at Stanford. Professors had emphasized the importance of version control and backup systems, not just for protecting against technical failures, but for maintaining accurate records of intellectual development. Every algorithm I'd developed, every optimization I'd implemented, every breakthrough I'd achieved, all of it was documented in personal repositories with detailed timestamps and development logs. I had comprehensive records showing not just what I'd created, but when I'd created it and how the ideas had evolved over time. More importantly, I had been maintaining these records on systems that were completely independent of Neuralink Solutions infrastructure. The backups were stored on personal cloud accounts, external hard drives, and even printed documentation that I kept in a safe deposit box at my bank. Bradley's attempt to control the narrative by restricting my access to company systems was already doomed to failure. He might control the official documentation, but I had the original sources that proved my individual contributions to every major component of the technology. Monday morning, I arrived at the office with a clear plan. I would document everything that was happening, gather additional evidence of Bradley's intellectual property theft, and prepare for the legal battle that was becoming inevitable. The first step was to formally request restoration of my access to the code repository. I sent a detailed email to Bradley, copying Jennifer Walsh and David Kim, outlining the specific technical documentation I needed to complete for the healthcare partnership and requesting immediate resolution of the access restriction. Bradley's response came within 2 hours, and it was even more revealing than I'd expected. He explained that the access restrictions were permanent security measures implemented on the advice of legal counsel. My role in the healthcare partnership documentation would be limited to high-level strategic input, while other team members would handle the detailed technical specifications. We need to maintain a clear separation between algorithm development and client implementation, Bradley wrote. This protects both our intellectual property and our competitive positioning. I'm sure you understand the importance of these security measures. The email was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, but it also provided written evidence of Bradley's systematic exclusion of me from my own work. I forwarded the email to my personal account and added it to my growing collection of documentation. Over the following days, I began paying closer attention to the conversations happening around me. Jennifer Walsh was being assigned to lead technical discussions that I had previously managed. David Kim was being briefed on algorithm implementations that he'd had no involvement in developing, and new team members were being given access to code repositories that I was no longer allowed to view. The healthcare partnership negotiations were progressing rapidly, with Bradley scheduling regular client meetings to discuss implementation timelines and performance guarantees. But when I asked to participate in these discussions, I was told that my expertise was better utilized on strategic research initiatives, rather than operational details. We need you to focus on the next generation of innovations, Bradley explained during one of our increasingly tense conversations. The healthcare partnership is important, but it's based on existing technology. Your talents are wasted on implementation details that other team members can handle. The patronizing tone was becoming more pronounced with each interaction. Bradley seemed to believe that he could convince me to accept my diminished role through a combination of flattery and strategic misdirection. But I was documenting everything, every conversation, every email, every decision that removed me from involvement in my own work. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, and I was beginning to understand the full scope of Bradley's strategy. The breakthrough came during a conversation with Sarah Mitchell, the neural network optimization specialist who had been with the company since its early days. Sarah had always been friendly and collaborative, but she seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the changes happening in the technical organization. "Marcus," she said during a casual lunch conversation, "I need to tell you something, but I don't want it to get back to Bradley." She explained that she had been asked to create alternative implementations of my core algorithms. The justification was that the company needed backup systems in case the original code needed to be modified or replaced. But Sarah had realized that the alternative implementations were actually designed to replicate my work without requiring access to my original code. "They're not just creating backups," Sarah said. "They're creating versions that can be attributed to other team members. I've been asked to document these implementations as if they were original developments, rather than reproductions of your work." This was the smoking gun I needed. Bradley wasn't just restricting my access to my own work. He was actively creating fraudulent documentation that would allow him to claim ownership of my intellectual property. "Sarah, I need you to keep detailed records of what you're being asked to do. Timestamps, email instructions, everything. This is going to become a legal issue, and accurate documentation will be crucial." Sarah agreed to help, but she was clearly nervous about the potential consequences. Bradley had made it clear that loyalty to the company was essential for career advancement, and questioning strategic decisions could result in termination. Over the following weeks, I began building a comprehensive case against Bradley's intellectual property theft. Sarah provided detailed documentation of the fraudulent algorithm reproductions. I maintained careful records of every conversation and email that demonstrated my exclusion from my own work, and I began researching the legal protections available to software developers in California. What I discovered was encouraging. California has some of the strongest intellectual property protections in the country, particularly for employees who can demonstrate individual contributions to technological innovation. The key was proving that my algorithms were genuinely original work that exceeded the scope of my employment responsibilities. This was where my obsessive documentation habits became invaluable. I had detailed records showing that my breakthrough algorithms had been developed through personal research and experimentation that went far beyond my assigned duties. I had timestamps proving that many of my innovations had been developed during evenings and weekends, using personal resources rather than company equipment. Most importantly, I had evidence that my algorithms were based on theoretical insights that I had developed during my graduate studies at Stanford, before I had ever heard of Neuralink solutions. The mathematical foundations of my behavioral prediction models were rooted in research I had conducted for my master's thesis, which was public record and clearly attributable to me personally. Bradley's assumption that all employee-created intellectual property automatically belonged to the company was legally questionable, particularly when that property was based on pre-existing personal research and developed through methods that exceeded standard employment expectations. But legal protections are only valuable if you can afford to enforce them. Taking on a well-funded startup with experienced legal counsel would require resources that I didn't have as a 25-year-old engineer with student loans and minimal savings. That's when I decided to take a different approach. Instead of fighting Bradley directly, I would let him complete his theft and then use his own actions against him. The Series B funding round was scheduled to close within 6 weeks. Investors were conducting final due diligence reviews, and Bradley was preparing for the formal announcement of the funding completion. The entire process depended on Neuralink Solutions' ability to demonstrate ownership of genuinely revolutionary technology. I realized that Bradley's theft of my algorithms had created a vulnerability that could be exploited at exactly the right moment. He was about to claim ownership of intellectual property that he couldn't legally possess, in front of investors who were committing millions of dollars based on that false claim. The timing would be crucial. If I revealed the theft too early, Bradley would have time to develop alternative strategies or legal defenses. If I waited too long, the investors would have already committed their funds and the legal situation would become more complex. I decided to wait until the Series B announcement was imminent. then reveal the intellectual property theft in a way that would maximize the damage to Bradley's credibility and minimize the harm to innocent employees and investors. But first, I needed to gather one final piece of evidence. I needed proof that Bradley was explicitly claiming ownership of my algorithms in his investor presentations. This required careful planning. I couldn't directly access the investor presentation materials, but I knew that Bradley would be practicing his presentations with the internal team before the final investor meeting. I volunteered to help with technical preparation for the investor presentations, offering to create detailed performance benchmarks and competitive analysis documents that would support Bradley's claims about our technology's superiority. Bradley was initially suspicious of my enthusiasm, but he ultimately decided that my technical expertise was too valuable to ignore during the critical final phase of the funding round. I need you to create comprehensive technical documentation that proves our algorithms are fundamentally superior to anything our competitors have developed, Bradley said during a strategy meeting. Investors need to understand that we're not just incrementally better, we're operating on a completely different level. I spent the next week creating exactly the documentation Bradley had requested: performance benchmarks that demonstrated our 98% accuracy rate, competitive analysis showing that our nearest competitors were achieving accuracy rates below 80%, technical specifications that proved our algorithms could operate efficiently on standard hardware while our competitors required specialized processing systems. All of the documentation was accurate and impressive. It was also clear evidence that the technology Bradley was claiming as proprietary Neuralink Solutions intellectual property was entirely based on my individual contribution. The final investor presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in downtown San Francisco. Bradley had arranged for the entire technical team to attend, partly to answer detailed questions about implementation and scalability, but mostly to demonstrate that Neuralink Solutions had the human resources necessary to execute on its ambitious expansion plan. I knew that this presentation would be my last opportunity to work within the company structure. After the funding round closed, Bradley would have the resources and legal protection to complete his theft of my intellectual property. He would also have the leverage to destroy my career in Silicon Valley if I attempted to challenge his claims. But I had been preparing for this moment for months, and I had resources that Bradley didn't know about. The morning of the presentation, I arrived at the office early and spent an hour reviewing my documentation one final time. Everything was in place. The evidence was comprehensive and legally sound. The timing was perfect. Bradley Richardson was about to discover that stealing someone's work is much easier than keeping it. The investor presentation was held at the offices of Whitmore & Associates, one of San Francisco's most prestigious venture capital firms. The conference room overlooked the Bay Bridge, with floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with morning sunlight. 12 investors were present, representing 4 different firms that were collectively considering a $40 million investment in Neuralink Solutions. Bradley had prepared meticulously for this meeting. His presentation slides were polished and professional, filled with compelling market analysis, revenue projections, and technical demonstration. He wore his most expensive suit, and carried himself with the confident demeanor of someone who was about to close the most important deal of his career. The technical team sat along one side of the conference table, ready to answer detailed questions about implementation challenges, scalability requirements, and competitive positioning. Jennifer Walsh had prepared comprehensive documentation about our data architecture. David Kim was ready to discuss integration timelines and client onboarding processes. Sarah Mitchell had created detailed performance benchmarks that demonstrated our algorithm's superiority over existing solutions. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, carrying a leather portfolio that contained the most important documents of my professional life. Everything I needed to destroy Bradley Richardson's career was organized in chronological order, with supporting evidence that would be impossible to dispute or discredit. Bradley began the presentation with his usual charismatic energy, outlining Neuralink Solutions' mission to revolutionize artificial intelligence through breakthrough behavioral prediction technology. He explained the market opportunity, the competitive landscape, and the company's strategic positioning for rapid growth and market domination. What makes Neuralink Solutions unique, Bradley said, advancing to a slide that displayed our core performance metrics, is our proprietary artificial intelligence algorithms that achieve prediction accuracy rates that exceed anything currently available in the market. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed comparison between our technology and our competitors' offering. Our algorithms demonstrated 98% accuracy in behavioral prediction tasks, while the best competing solutions achieved only 79% accuracy under similar testing conditions. These algorithms represent a fundamental breakthrough in how artificial intelligence can understand and predict human behavior, Bradley continued. They're based on mathematical principles that our technical team developed specifically for Neuralink solutions, and they provide us with a competitive advantage that will be extremely difficult for other companies to replicate. One of the investors, a woman named Rebecca Chen from Harrison Ventures, raised her hand to ask a question. Bradley, can you explain more about the development process for these algorithms? How long did it take your team to achieve these performance levels, and what makes your approach fundamentally different from existing methodologies? This was the question I had been waiting for. Bradley's response would either be honest about my contributions, or it would provide clear evidence of his fraudulent claims about intellectual property ownership. Excellent question, Rebecca, Bradley said, his confidence remaining strong. These algorithms were developed over approximately 18 months through an intensive collaborative effort between our senior technical staff. The breakthrough came when our team realized that traditional approaches to behavioral prediction were focusing on data quantity rather than pattern recognition efficiency. He was describing my work but attributing it to our team and our senior technical staff, rather than acknowledging my individual contributions. This was exactly the evidence I need. The mathematical foundations are based on chaos theory applications to behavioral analysis, Bradley continued. Instead of collecting massive amounts of personal data, our algorithms identify subtle patterns in minimal datasets. This approach provides better accuracy while addressing privacy concerns that have limited the commercial viability of competing solutions. Every word he spoke was describing intellectual property that I had developed individually, often during evenings and weekends, using theoretical insights from my graduate research at Stanford. Bradley was claiming ownership of work that he had no legal right to possess. Another investor, Michael Torres from Pinnacle Capital, asked about the technical team's background and qualifications. We have an exceptional group of engineers, Bradley responded. Jennifer Walsh brings extensive experience from Google's data architecture team. David Kim has deep expertise in predictive modeling from his work at Netflix. Sarah Mitchell specializes in neural network optimization and has contributed significantly to our algorithm performance improvements. He mentioned every member of the technical team except me. Despite the fact that I was sitting 10 feet away from him, despite the fact that the entire presentation was based on algorithms I had developed, Bradley was systematically excluding me from any recognition or attribution. Rebecca Chen noticed the omission and looked directly at me. I'm sorry, I don't think we've been introduced, she said. What's your role on the technical team? This was the moment I had been preparing for. Bradley's face showed a flash of panic before he quickly recovered his composure. Marcus Thompson is one of our principal engineers, Bradley said. He's been involved in various aspects of our algorithm development and optimization processes. The description was so generic and dismissive that it was almost insulting, but it also provided the perfect opportunity for me to Actually, I said, standing up and opening my leather portfolio, I think there might be some confusion about the development history of these algorithms. I'd like to clarify a few technical details that might be relevant to your investment decision. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Bradley's confident demeanor evaporated instantly, replaced by the expression of someone who suddenly realized that they had walked into a trap. Marcus, Bradley said, his voice carrying a warning tone, I don't think detailed technical discussions are necessary for this audience. Perhaps we should focus on the business implications of our technology rather than implementation specific. But Rebecca Chen was clearly interested in hearing what I had to say. Actually, I'd very much like to understand the technical details, she said. As potential investors, we need to have complete confidence in the intellectual property foundations of your competitive advantage. I began distributing copies of a document I had prepared specifically for this moment. It was a comprehensive technical analysis that compared Neuralink Solutions' current algorithm documentation with the original development work I had performed individually. This document provides a detailed chronological analysis of how our core behavioral prediction algorithms were actually developed, I said. I think you'll find the timeline quite interesting. The investors began reviewing the documentation while Bradley sat in stunned silence. The papers contained side-by-side comparisons of my original algorithm implementations with the versions currently being claimed as Neuralink Solutions' proprietary technology. More importantly, the document included timestamps and version control records that proved the algorithms had been developed through my individual research, often using personal computing resources and theoretical insights from my graduate studies at Stanford. As you can see, I continued, the mathematical foundations for these algorithms were established during my master's thesis research, which was completed 6 months before I joined Neuralink Solutions. The core breakthrough insights were developed during my personal research time, and the implementation work was performed using methodologies that significantly exceeded my assigned employment responsibilities. Michael Torres looked up from the documentation with a concerned expression. Are you suggesting that there are intellectual property ownership questions regarding these algorithms? I'm suggesting that the ownership claims being presented in this funding round are not legally accurate, I replied. Under California intellectual property law, employees retain ownership rights to innovations that are based on pre-existing personal research and developed through methods that exceed standard employment expectations. The room was completely silent except for the sound of papers rustling as investors continued reviewing my documentation. Bradley looked like he was about to be sick. Furthermore, I continued, I have comprehensive evidence that Neuralink Solutions has been systematically attempting to obscure my individual contributions to this technology through fraudulent documentation practices and deliberate misattribution of intellectual property ownership. I distributed a second set of documents that contained email records, internal memos, and technical documentation showing how Bradley had been removing my name from algorithm attributions and restricting my access to code repositories containing my own work. Rebecca Chen was the first to speak. Bradley, these are very serious allegations. Can you respond to the specific claims being made about intellectual property ownership and documentation practices? Bradley's response was a masterclass in desperate damage control. There seems to be some confusion about standard intellectual property practices in the technology industry, he said. All work performed by Neuralink Solutions employees is owned by the company, regardless of when or how that work was developed. Marcus is a valued team member, but he's misunderstanding the legal framework that governs employee contributions to corporate intellectual property. But I had prepared for exactly this response. That's not actually accurate under California law, I said, distributing a third set of documents. These are legal opinions from 3 different intellectual property attorneys, all confirming that employees retain ownership rights to innovations based on pre-existing personal research, developed using personal resources, and created through methods that exceed assigned employment responsibilities. The legal opinions were devastating to Bradley's position. They clearly stated that my algorithms qualified for individual ownership protection under multiple California statutes, and that any attempt to claim corporate ownership without proper compensation would constitute intellectual property theft. Additionally, I continued, I have documentation showing that Neuralink Solutions has been engaged in systematic fraud regarding the attribution and ownership of these algorithms. This includes creation of false documentation designed to obscure my individual contributions and deliberate misrepresentation of development timelines and methodologies. Michael Torres closed his copy of my documentation and looked directly at Bradley. This is extremely concerning. If these allegations are accurate, Neuralink Solutions may not actually own the intellectual property that forms the foundation of your competitive advantage. That would make this investment opportunity fundamentally different from what you've presented. Other investors were having similar reactions. Rebecca Chen was taking detailed notes and asking pointed questions about the legal implications. The representatives from the other venture capital firms were exchanging worried glances and having whispered conversations about the potential liability exposure. Bradley made one final attempt to control the narrative. "I think Marcus is overcomplicating a simple employment relationship," he said. "These algorithms were developed using company resources, during company time, as part of his assigned responsibilities. Any personal research he may have conducted is irrelevant to the question of corporate ownership." But Sarah Mitchell, who had been sitting quietly throughout the presentation, suddenly spoke up. "That's not true," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I was asked to create alternative implementations of Marcus's algorithms, specifically because the company was concerned about ownership questions. I have detailed records of instructions to develop new versions that could be attributed to other team members rather than Marcus." The confession was the final nail in Bradley's coffin. Sarah's testimony provided direct evidence of the fraudulent documentation practices I had been alleging, and it came from a witness who had no personal motivation to lie about the situation. The investors spent the next hour asking detailed questions about the legal situation, the development timeline, and the implications for their potential investment. It became increasingly clear that Neuralink Solutions' claims about its intellectual property were not just inaccurate, they were potentially criminal. By the end of the meeting, all 4 venture capital firms had withdrawn their investment offers. The Series B funding round that Bradley had been counting on to finance his theft of my intellectual property had collapsed completely. But that was just the beginning of Bradley Richardson's problem. Because I hadn't just prepared a legal defense, I had prepared a complete counterattack that would ensure he could never steal anyone else's work again. The aftermath of the investor presentation was swift and devastating for Bradley Richardson. Within 24 hours, word had spread throughout San Francisco's venture capital community that Neuralink Solutions was facing serious intellectual property disputes that could invalidate their core technology claim. The startup ecosystem is surprisingly small, and news of potential fraud travels fast when millions of dollars are at stake. But I wasn't content to simply watch Bradley's company collapse. He had attempted to steal 18 months of my life's work, destroy my career prospects, and claim credit for innovations that could have established my reputation in the artificial intelligence industry. Passive vindication wasn't enough. I wanted active justice. The morning after the presentation, I received a panicked phone call from Jennifer Walsh. She had arrived at the office to find Bradley in full crisis management mode, frantically scheduling emergency meetings with lawyers, investors, and board members. "Marcus, what exactly happened yesterday?" Jennifer asked. "Bradley is telling everyone that you sabotaged the funding round with false claims about intellectual property ownership. He's saying you violated your employment agreement, and that the company is going to sue you for damages." The threat didn't surprise me. When desperate people face exposure, they often respond with escalating aggression rather than accepting responsibility for their actions. "Jennifer, I need you to understand something," I said. "Everything I presented yesterday was completely accurate and legally verified. Bradley has been systematically stealing my work for months, and he got caught. His threats about lawsuits are just attempts to intimidate me into backing down." "But what does this mean for the rest of us?" Jennifer asked. "If the funding round is cancelled, the company might not survive. David and Sarah and I could lose our jobs because of this." This was the conversation I had been dreading. My conflict with Bradley was putting innocent employees at risk, and I needed to find a way to protect them while still holding him accountable for his theft. "Jennifer, I want you to know that I've been thinking about everyone's situation. I have a plan that will protect the technical team while ensuring that Bradley faces consequences for what he's done." Over the next week, I implemented a strategy that I had been developing since the first time I realized Bradley was trying to steal my work. It was complex, legally sophisticated, and designed to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. The first step was establishing independent ownership of my intellectual property through formal legal registration. Using the documentation I had been maintaining, I filed comprehensive patent applications for the core behavioral prediction algorithms, the optimization methodologies, and the mathematical frameworks that formed the foundation of Neuralink Solutions' competitive advantage. The patent applications included detailed technical specifications, development timelines, and evidence of the original research that had led to the algorithmic breakthroughs. Most importantly, they included proof that the innovations were based on pre-existing personal research that predated my employment at Neuralink Solutions. California intellectual property law is particularly favorable to individual inventors who can demonstrate that their innovations exceed the scope of their employment responsibility. My documentation was comprehensive enough to establish clear ownership rights that would be extremely difficult for Bradley or Neuralink Solutions to challenge successfully. But filing patent applications was just the foundation for a much larger strategy. The second step was establishing my own company. Thomson Behavioral Analytics was incorporated as a Delaware corporation with myself as the sole founder and CEO. The company's mission was to commercialize advanced artificial intelligence technologies for behavioral prediction and analysis across multiple industry sectors. I used personal savings and a small loan from my parents to cover the initial incorporation costs and legal fees. The company started with a single employee, me, working out of a co-working space in downtown San Francisco. But it had something that made it immediately valuable: ownership of revolutionary AI algorithms that could generate millions of dollars in revenue. The third step was the most audacious part of my strategy. Instead of simply defending myself against Bradley's theft, I decided to go on the offensive by directly competing with Neuralink Solutions for their existing clients and potential customers. I knew everything about Neuralink Solutions' business operations, client relationships, and strategic plans. I had detailed knowledge of their pricing structures, implementation timelines, and technical limitations. Most importantly, I had the actual algorithms that provided their competitive advantage, while they only had incomplete copies and fraudulent documentation. My first target was the healthcare partnership that had been central to Neuralink Solutions' Series B funding strategy. The healthcare company was still interested in implementing behavioral prediction technology, but the intellectual property disputes had made them nervous about moving forward with Neuralink Solutions. I reached out directly to Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the Chief Information Officer who had been leading the partnership negotiations on behalf of the healthcare company. I explained the situation honestly and offered an alternative solution that would give them access to the genuine algorithms without the legal implications of working with Neuralink Solutions. Hernandez, I said during our phone conversation, I understand that you're concerned about the intellectual property situation with Neuralink Solutions. I want to offer you the opportunity to work directly with the person who actually developed the algorithms you're interested in licensing. The conversation lasted for 2 hours. Dr. Hernandez was impressed by my technical knowledge and my ability to answer detailed questions about algorithm implementation that Neuralink Solutions team had been unable to address satisfactorily. More importantly, she was intrigued by the possibility of working with a smaller, more agile company that could provide customized solutions without the bureaucratic overhead of a larger organization. Marcus, your technical expertise is clearly superior to what we experienced with Neuralink Solutions, Dr. Hernandez said, but you're a one-person company. How can we have confidence that you can deliver on the implementation timeline and support requirements for a project of this scale? I had prepared for exactly this question. Dr. Hernandez, I'd like to introduce you to some former colleagues who are interested in joining Thomson Behavioral Analytics to work on innovative projects with forward-thinking clients like your organization. Jennifer Walsh had been the first to reach out after the investor presentation disaster. She had witnessed Bradley's increasingly erratic behavior and realized that Neuralink Solutions was probably not going to survive the intellectual property scandal. When I offered her the position of Chief Technology Officer at Thomson Behavioral Analytics, she accepted immediately. David Kim and Sarah Mitchell followed within the next week. Both had become uncomfortable with Bradley's management style and were excited about the opportunity to work on cutting-edge projects without the corporate politics and ethical compromises that had characterized their experience at Neuralink Solutions. Within 2 weeks of the failed investor presentation, I had recruited Neuralink Solutions' entire senior technical team to join my new company. We brought with us detailed knowledge of client requirements, implementation best practices, and strategic opportunities that Bradley had been pursuing unsuccessfully. But most importantly, we brought genuine expertise and ethical business practices that would allow us to build long-term client relationships based on trust and technical excellence, rather than fraudulent claims and stolen intellectual property. The healthcare partnership became Thomson Behavioral Analytics' first major contract. Dr. Hernandez was impressed by our technical capabilities and our transparent approach to intellectual property ownership. The contract value was substantial enough to fund significant expansion of our team and technology platform. Word of our success spread quickly through the industry. Other companies that had been considering partnerships with Neuralink Solutions began reaching out to explore alternatives. Within 6 months, Thomson Behavioral Analytics had secured contracts with 4 major clients and established itself as a legitimate competitor in the behavioral prediction technology market. Meanwhile, Neuralink Solutions was collapsed. The failed Series B funding round had left the company without the capital necessary to continue operations. Bradley's credibility in the venture capital community was destroyed, making it impossible to secure alternative finance, and the departure of the entire senior technical team had eliminated the company's ability to deliver on existing client commitments. The final blow came when several clients filed lawsuits alleging that Neuralink Solutions had misrepresented their technical capabilities and intellectual property ownership. The legal costs and potential damages were more than the company could handle, forcing Bradley to declare bankruptcy within 8 months of the investor presentation. But my vindication wasn't complete until I received a phone call from Rebecca Chen at Harrison Ventures. She had been following the developments in the behavioral prediction technology market and was interested in exploring investment opportunities with Thomson Behavioral Analytics. "Marcus," she said, "I've been watching what you've built over the past year and I'm extremely impressed. Not just with the technical achievements, but with how you've handled a very difficult situation with integrity and professionalism." She explained that Harrison Ventures was interested in leading a Series A funding round for Thomson Behavioral Analytics. The proposed investment would provide capital for aggressive expansion while allowing me to maintain majority ownership and control of the company. "We believe that Thomson Behavioral Analytics has the potential to become the dominant player in behavioral prediction technology," Rebecca said. "Your algorithms are genuinely revolutionary, your team is exceptional, and your approach to business development is exactly what the market needs." The Series A funding round closed 6 months later with a company valuation of $80 million. Thomson Behavioral Analytics used the investment to expand our technical team, develop new product offerings, and establish partnerships with major technology companies that wanted to integrate our algorithms into their existing platform. 2 years after Bradley Richardson fired me and tried to steal my work, Thomson Behavioral Analytics had become one of the fastest-growing artificial intelligence companies in Silicon Valley. We employed 47 people, generated $23 million in annual revenue, and held patents on the most advanced behavioral prediction technology available in the commercial market. But the most satisfying moment came when I received an email from Bradley himself. He had been trying to rebuild his career after the Neuralink Solutions collapse, but his reputation for intellectual property theft had made it impossible to find employment at any reputable technology company. "Marcus," the email read, "I want to apologize for how things ended at Neuralink Solutions. I made serious mistakes in judgment, and I understand that my actions caused significant harm to your career and personal well-being. I hope that we can find a way to move forward constructively." The apology was probably motivated more by desperation than genuine remorse, but it represented a complete reversal from the arrogant executive who had tried to destroy my career 2 years earlier. I responded professionally but briefly, "Bradley, I appreciate your message. I hope you've learned from this experience, and that you'll treat future colleagues with the respect and honesty they deserve." Today, Thomson Behavioral Analytics continues to grow and innovate. We've expanded into new markets, developed partnerships with Fortune 500 companies, and established ourselves as the leading provider of ethical artificial intelligence solutions for behavioral analysis. More importantly, we've created a company culture that values individual contributions, respects intellectual property rights, and maintains the highest standards of professional integrity. The experience taught me that talent and hard work aren't enough to guarantee success in Silicon Valley. You also need to protect yourself against people who will try to exploit your contributions for their own benefit. But it also taught me that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult and risky, can lead to outcomes that exceed your most ambitious expectations. Bradley Richardson thought he could steal my work and destroy my career. What he actually did was give me the motivation and opportunity to build something even better than what he was trying to take. Sometimes the best revenge is simply being more successful than the people who tried to hold you back. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest upload.